Chapter 1 of the Count of Monte Cristo. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 1. Marseille. The Arrival. On the 24th of February, 1815, the lookout at Notre Dame de la Garde signaled the three-master, the Pharaon, from Smyrna, Trieste, and Naples. As usual, a pilot put off immediately, and rounding the Château d'If, got on board the vessel between Cape Morgion and Rion Island. Immediately, and according to custom, the ramparts of Fort Saint-Jean were covered with spectators. It is always an event at Marseille for a ship to come into port, especially when this ship, like the Pharaon, had been built, rigged, and laden at the old Fosse docks, and belonged to an owner of the city. The ship drew on and had safely passed the strait, which some volcanic shock had made between the Calasareigne and Jaros Islands, had doubled Pomègue, and approached the harbour under topsails, jib, and spanker, but so slowly and sedately that the idlers, with that instinct which is the forerunner of evil, asked one another what misfortune could have happened on board. However, those experienced in navigation saw plainly that if any accident had occurred, it was not to the vessel herself, for she bore down with all the evidence of being skilfully handled, the anchor a cockbill, the jib-boom guys already eased off, and standing by the side of the pilot, who was steering the Pharaon toward the narrow entrance of the inner port, was a young man, who with activity and vigilant eye watched every motion of the ship and repeated each direction of the pilot. The vague disquietude which prevailed among the spectators had so much affected one of the crowd that he did not await the arrival of the vessel in harbour, but jumping into a small skiff desired to be pulled alongside the Pharaon, which he reached as she rounded into La Reserve basin. When the young man on board saw this person approach, he left his station by the pilot and, hat in hand, leaned over the ship's bulwarks. He was a fine, tall, slim young fellow of 18 or 20, with black eyes and hair as dark as a raven's wing, and his whole appearance bespoke that calmness and resolution peculiar to men accustomed from their cradle to contend with danger. "Ah, is it you, Dantès?" cried the man in the skiff. "What's the matter, and why have you such an air of sadness aboard?" "A great misfortune, Monsieur Morel," replied the young man. "A great misfortune, for me especially. Off Civita Vecchia we lost our brave Captain Leclerc." "And the cargo?" inquired the owner eagerly. "Is all safe, Monsieur Morel. I think you will be satisfied on that head, but poor Captain Leclerc." "What happened to him?" asked the owner with an air of considerable resignation. "What happened to the worthy captain?" "He died." "Fell into the sea?" "No, sir. He died of brain fever in dreadful agony." Then, turning to the crew, he said, "Bear a hand there to take in sail." All hands obeyed, and at once the 8 or 10 seamen who composed the crew sprang to their respective stations at the spanker brails and outhaul, topsail sheets and halyards, the jib downhaul, and the topsail clewlines and buntlines. The young sailor gave a look to see that his orders were promptly and accurately obeyed, and then turned again to the owner. "And how did this misfortune occur?" inquired the latter, resuming the interrupted conversation. "Alas, sir, in the most unexpected manner. After a long talk with the harbour master, Captain Leclerc left Naples greatly disturbed in mind. In 24 hours he was attacked by a fever, and died 3 days afterwards. We performed the usual burial service, and he is at rest, sewed up in his hammock with a 36-pound shot at his head and his heels, off El Giglio Island. We bring to his widow his sword and cross of honour. It was worth while, truly," added the young man with a melancholy smile, "to make war against the English for 10 years, and to die in his bed at last like everybody else." "Well, you see, Edmond," replied the owner, who appeared more comforted at every moment,
We are all mortal, and the old must make way for the young. If not, why, there would be no promotion. And since you assure me that the cargo
is all safe and sound, Monsieur Morel, take my word for it, and I advise you not to take 25,000 francs for the profits of the voyage." Then, as they were just passing the round tower, the young man shouted, "Stand by there to lower the topsails and jib! Brail up the spanker!" The order was executed as promptly as it would have been on board a man-of-war. "Let go and clew up!" At this last command all the sails were lowered and the vessel moved almost imperceptibly onwards. "Now, if you will come on board, Monsieur Morel," said Dantès, observing the owner's impatience, "here is your supercargo, Monsieur Danglars, coming out of his cabin, who will furnish you with every particular. As for me, I must look after the anchoring and dress the ship in mourning." The owner did not wait for a second invitation. He seized a rope which Dantès flung to him, and with an activity that would have done credit to a sailor, climbed up the side of the ship, while the young man, going to his task, left the conversation to Danglars, who now came toward the owner. He was a man of 25 or 26 years of age, of unprepossessing countenance, obsequious to his superiors, insolent to his subordinates, and this, in addition to his position as responsible agent on board, which is always obnoxious to the sailors, made him as much disliked by the crew as Edmond Dantès was beloved by them. "Well, Monsieur Morel," said Danglars, "you have heard of the misfortune that has befallen us." Yes, poor Captain Leclerc. He was a brave and an honest man, and a first-rate seaman, one who had seen long and honorable service, as became a man charged with the interests of a house so important as that of Morel and Son," replied Danglars. "But," replied the owner, glancing after Dantès, who was watching the anchoring of his vessel, "it seems to me that a sailor needs not be so old as you say, Danglars, to understand his business, for our friend Edmond seems to understand it thoroughly, and not to require instruction from anyone." "Yes," said Danglars, darting at Edmond a look gleaming with hate. "Yes, he is young, and youth is invariably self-confident. Scarcely was the captain's breath out of his body when he assumed the command without consulting anyone, and he caused us to lose a day and a half at the island of Elba, instead of making for Marseille direct." "As to taking command of the vessel," replied Morel, "that was his duty as captain's mate. As to losing a day and a half off the island of Elba, he was wrong, unless the vessel needed repairs." "The vessel was in as good condition as I am, and as I hope you are, Monsieur Morel, and this day and a half were lost from pure whim, for the pleasure of going ashore and nothing else." "Dantès," said the ship owner, turning toward the young man, "come this way." "In a moment, sir," answered Dantès, "and I'm with you." Then calling to the crew, he said, "Let go!" The anchor was instantly dropped, and the chain ran rattling through the porthole. Dantès continued at his post in spite of the presence of the pilot, until this maneuver was completed, and then he added, "Half-mast the colours, and square the yards." "You see," said Danglars, "he fancies himself captain already, upon my word." "And so in fact he is," said the owner. "Except your signature and your partner's, Monsieur Morel." "And why should he not have this?" asked the owner. "He is young, it is true, but it seems to me a thorough seaman and of full experience." A cloud passed over Danglars' brow. "Your pardon, Monsieur Morel," said Dantès, approaching. "The vessel now rides at anchor, and I'm at your service. You hailed me, I think?" Danglars repeated a step or two. "I wish to inquire why you stopped at the island of Elba." "I do not know, sir. It was to fulfill the last instructions of Captain Leclerc, who, when dying, gave me a packet for Marshal Bertrand." "Oh, then, did you see him, Edmond?" "Oh, The marshal?"
"Yes."
Morrel looked around him, and then drawing Dantès on one side, he said suddenly, "And how is the Emperor?" "Very well, as far as I could judge from the sight of him."
"You saw the Emperor, then?"
"He entered the marshal's apartment while I was there."
"And you spoke to him?"
"Why, it was he who spoke to me, sir," said Dantès with a smile.
"And what did he say to you?"
"Asked me questions about the vessel, the time she left Marseille, the course she had taken, and what was her cargo. I believe if she had not been laden, and I had been her master, he would have bought her. But I told him I was only mate, and that she belonged to the firm of Morrel and Son." "Ah, yes," he said, "I know them. The Morrels have been ship owners from father to son, and there was a Morrel who served in the same regiment with me when I was in garrison at Valence."
"Pardieu, and that is true," cried the owner, greatly delighted.
"And that was Policar Morrel, my uncle, who was afterwards a captain. Dantès, you must tell my uncle that the Emperor remembered him, and you will see it will bring tears into the old soldier's eyes. Come, come," continued he, patting Edmond's shoulder kindly. "You did very right, Dantès, to follow Captain Leclerc's instructions and touch at Elba. Although if it were known that you had conveyed a packet to the marshal, and had conversed with the Emperor, it might bring you into trouble." "How could that bring me into trouble, sir?" asked Dantès. "For I did not even know of what I was the bearer, and the Emperor merely made such inquiries as he would of the first comer. But, pardon me, here are the health officers and the customs inspectors coming alongside," and the young man went to the gangway. As he departed, Danglars approached and said, "Well, it appears that he has given you satisfactory reasons for his landing at Porto Ferrajo."
"Yes, most satisfactory, my dear Danglars."
"Well, so much the better," said the supercargo, "for it is not pleasant to think that a comrade has not done his duty."
"Dantès has done his," replied the owner, "and that is not saying much. It was Captain Leclerc who gave orders for this delay."
"Talking of Captain Leclerc, has not Dantès given you a letter from him?"
"To me? No. Was there one?"
"I believe that besides the packet, Captain Leclerc confided a letter to his care."
"Of what packet are you speaking, Danglars?"
"Why, that which Dantès left at Porto Ferrajo."
"How do you know he had a packet to leave at Porto Ferrajo?" Danglars turned very red.
"I was passing close to the door of the captain's cabin, which was half open, and I saw him give the packet and letter to Dantès."
"He did not speak to me of it," replied the shipowner, "but if there be any letter, he will give it to me."
Danglars reflected for a moment. "Then, Monsieur Morrel, I beg of you," said he, "not to say a word to Dantès on the subject. I may have been mistaken." At this moment the young man returned. Danglars withdrew.
"Well, my dear Dantès, are you now free?" inquired the owner.
"Yes, sir."
"You have not been long detained?"
"No. I gave the custom house officers a copy of our bill of lading, and as to the other papers, they sent a man off with the pilot, to whom I gave them."
"Then you have nothing more to do here?"
"No, everything's all right now."
"Then you can come and dine with me."
"I really must ask you to excuse me, Monsieur Morrel. My first visit is due to my father, though I am not the less grateful for the honor you have done me."
"Right, Dantès, quite right. I always knew you were a good son."
"And," inquired Dantès with some hesitation, "do you know how my father is?"
"Well, I believe, my dear Edmond, though I have not seen him lately."
"Yes, he likes to keep himself shut up in his little room."
"That proves, at least, that he has wanted for nothing during your absence."
Dantès smiled. "My father is proud, sir, and if he had not a meal left, I doubt if he would have asked anything from anyone, except from heaven."
"Well, then, after this first visit has been made, we shall count on you."
"I must again excuse myself, Monsieur Morrel, for After this first visit has been paid, I have another which I am most anxious to pay."
"True, Dantès. I forgot that there was at the Catalans someone who expects you no less impatiently than your father, the lovely Mercedes."
Dantès blushed.
Said the shipowner, "I am not in the least surprised, for she has been to me 3 times, inquiring if there were any news of the Pharaon. Peste, Edmond, you have a very handsome mistress."
"She is not my mistress," replied the young sailor gravely. "She is my betrothed."
"Sometimes one and the same thing," said Morrel with a smile.
"Not with us, sir," replied Dantès.
Well, my dear Edmond," continued the owner, "don't let me detain you. You have managed my affairs so well that I ought to allow you all the time you require for your own. Do you want any money?"
"No, sir. I have all my pay to take, nearly 3 months' wages."
"You are a careful fellow, Edmond."
"Say I have a poor father, sir."
Yes. I know how good a son you are, so now hasten away to see your father. I have a son too, and I should be very wroth with those who detained him from me after a 3 months' voyage."
"Then I have your leave, sir?"
"Yes, if you have nothing more to say to me."
"Nothing."
"Captain Leclerc did not, before he died, give you a letter for me?"
"He was unable to write, sir. But that reminds me that I must ask your leave of absence for some days."
"To get married?"
"Oh, yes, first, and then to go to Paris."
"Oh, very good. Have what time you require, Dantès. It will take quite 6 weeks to unload the cargo, and we cannot get you ready for sea until 3 months after that. Only be back again in 3 months, for the Pharaon," added the owner, patting the young sailor on the back, "cannot sail without her captain."
"Without her captain!" cried Dantès, his eyes sparkling with animation. "Pray mind what you say, for you are touching on the most secret wishes of my heart. Is it really your intention to make me captain of the Pharaon?"
"If I were sole owner, we'd shake hands on it now, my dear Dantès, and call it settled. But I have a partner. And you know the Italian proverb, chi ha compagno ha padrone. He who has a partner has a master. But the thing is at least half done, as you have 1 out of 2 votes. Rely on me to procure you the other. I will do my best."
"Ah, Monsieur Morrel!" exclaimed the young seaman with tears in his eyes and grasping the other's hand. "Monsieur Morrel, I thank you in the name of my father and of Mercedes."
"Oh, that's all right, Edmond. There's a providence that watches over the deserving. Go to your father. Go and see Mercedes, and afterwards come to me."
"Shall I row you ashore?"
No, thank you. I shall remain and look over the accounts with Danglars. Have you been satisfied with him this voyage?"
"That is according to the sense you attach to the question, sir. Do you mean, is he a good comrade? No, for I think he never liked me since the day when I was silly enough, after a little quarrel we had, to propose to him to stop for 10 minutes at the island of Monte Cristo to settle the dispute, a proposition which I was wrong to suggest, and he quite right to refuse. If you mean as responsible agent when you ask me the question, I believe there is nothing to say against him, and that you will be content with the way in which he has performed his duty."
"But tell me, Dantès, if you had command of the Pharaon, would you be glad to see Danglars remain?"
"Captain or mate, Monsieur Morrel, I shall always have the greatest respect for those who possess the owner's confidence."
That's right, Dantès. I see you are a thoroughly good fellow, and will retain you no longer. Go, for I see how impatient you are."
"Then I have leave?"
"Go, I tell you."
"May I have the use of your skiff?"
"Certainly."
"Then for the present, Monsieur Morrel, farewell, and 1,000 thanks."
"I hope soon to see you again, my dear Edmond. Good luck to you."
The young sailor jumped into the skiff and sat down in the stern sheets, with the order that he be put ashore at La Canebière. The two oarsmen bent to their work, and the little boat glided away as rapidly as possible in the midst of the 1,000 vessels which choke up the narrow way which leads between the two rows of ships from the mouth of the harbour to the Quai d'Orléans. The ship-owner, smiling, followed him with his eyes until he saw him spring out on the quay and disappear in the midst of the throng, which from 5 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night swarms in the famous street of La Canebière, a street of which the modern Phocéens are so proud that they say with all the gravity in the world, and with that accent which gives so much character to what is said, "If Paris had La Canebière, Paris would be a second Marseille." On turning around, the owner saw Danglars behind him, apparently awaiting orders, but in reality also watching the young sailor. But there was a great difference in the expression of the two men who thus followed the movements of Edmond Dantès. End of Chapter 1.
Chapter 2 of the Count of Monte Cristo. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 2. Father and Son. We will leave Danglars struggling with the demon of hatred, and endeavouring to insinuate in the ear of the ship-owner some evil suspicions against his comrade, and follow Dantès, who, after having traversed La Canebière, took the Rue de Noailles, and entering a small house on the left of the Allée de Meilhan, rapidly ascended 4 flights of a dark staircase, holding the baluster with one hand, while with the other he repressed the beatings of his heart, and paused before a half-open door, from which he could see the whole of a small room. This room was occupied by Dantès' father. The news of the arrival of the Pharaon had not yet reached the old man, who, mounted on a chair, was amusing himself by training with trembling hand the nasturtiums and sprays of clematis that clambered over the trellis at his window. Suddenly he felt an arm thrown around his body, and a well-known voice behind him exclaimed, "Father! Dear father!" The old man uttered a cry, and turned round. Then, seeing his son, he fell into his arms, pale and trembling. "What ails you, my dearest father? Are you ill?" inquired the young man, much alarmed. "No, no, my dear Edmond, my boy, my son. No, but I did not expect you. And joy, the surprise of seeing you so suddenly. I feel as if I were going to die." "Come, come, cheer up, my dear father. 'Tis I, really I. They say joy never hurts, and so I came to you without any warning. Come now, do smile, instead of looking at me so solemnly. Here I am, back again, and we are going to be happy." "Yes, yes, my boy, so we will. So we will," replied the old man. "But how shall we be happy? Shall you never leave me again? Come, tell me all the good fortune that has befallen you." "God forgive me," said the young man, "for rejoicing at happiness derived from the misery of others. But heaven knows I did not seek this good fortune. It has happened, and I really cannot pretend to lament it. The good Captain Leclerc is dead, father, and it is probable that with the aid of Monsieur Morrel I shall have his place. Do you understand, father? Only imagine me a captain at 20, with 100 louis pay, and a share in the profits. Is this not more than a poor sailor like me could have hoped for?" "Yes, my dear boy," replied the old man, "it is very fortunate. Well then, with the first money I touch, I mean you to have a small house, with a garden in which to plant clematis, nasturtiums, and honeysuckle." "But what ails you, father? Are you not well?" "'Tis nothing, nothing. It will soon pass away." And as he said so, the old man's strength failed him, and he fell backwards. "Come, come," said the young man. "A glass of wine, father, will revive you. Where do you keep your wine?" "No, no, thanks. You need not look for it. I do not want it," said the old man. "Yes, yes, father, tell me where it is." And he opened 2 or 3 cupboards. "It is no use," said the old man. "There is no wine." "What, no wine?" said Dantès, turning pale, and looking alternately at the hollow cheeks of the old man and the empty cupboards. "What, no wine? Have you wanted money, father?" "I want nothing now that I have you," said the old man. "Yet," stammered Dantès, wiping the perspiration from his brow. "Yet I gave you 200 francs when I left 3 months ago." Yes, Edmond, that is true. But you forgot at that time a little debt to our neighbour, Caderousse. He reminded me of it, telling me if I did not pay for you, he would be paid by Monsieur Morrel, and so you see, lest he might do you an injury—" "Well?" "Why, I paid him." "But," cried Dantès, "it was 140 francs I owed Caderousse." "Yes," stammered the old man. "And you paid him out of the 200 francs I left you?" The old man nodded. "So that you have lived for 3 months on 60 francs," muttered Edmond. "You know how little I require," said the old man. "Heaven pardon me," cried Edmond, falling on his knees before his father. "What are you doing? You have wounded me to the heart." "Never mind it, for I see you once more," said the old man. "And now it's all over. Everything is all right again." "Yes, here I am," said the young man, "with a promising future and a little money." "Here, father, here," he said. "Take this. Take it, and send for something immediately." And he emptied his pockets on the table, the contents consisting of a dozen gold pieces, 5 or 6 5-franc pieces, and some smaller coin. The countenance of old Dantès brightened. "Whom does this belong to?" he inquired. "To me, to you, to us. Take it, buy some provisions, be happy, and tomorrow we shall have more." "Gently, gently," said the old man, with a smile. "And by your leave, I will use your purse moderately, for they would say, if they saw me buy too many things at a time, that I had been obliged to await your return in order to be able to purchase them. Do as you please, but first of all, pray have a servant, father. I will not have you left alone so long. I have some smuggled coffee and most capital tobacco in a small chest in the hold, which you shall have tomorrow. But hush! Here comes somebody. 'Tis Caderousse, who has heard of your arrival, and no doubt comes to congratulate you on your fortunate return." "Ah, lips that say one thing while the heart thinks another," murmured Edmond. "But never mind. He is a neighbour who has done us a service on a time, so he's welcome." As Edmond paused, the black and bearded head of Caderousse appeared at the door. He was a man of 25 or 6, and held a piece of cloth, which, being a tailor, he was about to make into a coat lining. "What, is it you, Edmond, back again?" said he, with a broad Marseillaise accent, and a grin that displayed his ivory white teeth. "Yes, as you see, neighbor Caderousse, and ready to be agreeable to you in any way and every way," replied Dantès, but ill concealing his coldness under this cloak of civility. "Thanks, thanks. But fortunately I do not want for anything, and it chances that at times there are others who have need of me." Dantès made a gesture. "I do not allude to you, my boy. No, no. I lent you money, and you returned it. That's like good neighbours, and we are quits." "We are never quits with those who oblige us," was Dantès' reply. "For when we do not owe them money, we owe them gratitude." "What's the use of mentioning that? What is done is done. Let us talk of your happy return, my boy. I had gone on the quay to match a piece of mulberry cloth, when I met friend Danglars. 'You at Marseille?' 'Yes,' says he. 'I thought you were at Smyrna.' 'I was, but am now back again.' 'And where is the dear boy, our little Edmond?' 'Why, with his father, no doubt,' replied Danglars. 'And so I came,' added Caderousse, 'as fast as I could to have the pleasure of shaking hands with a friend.' 'Worthy Caderousse,' said the old man, 'he's so much attached to us.' 'Yes, to be sure I am. I love and esteem you, because honest folks are so rare. But it seems you have come back rich, my boy,' continued the tailor, looking askance at the handful of gold and silver which Dantès had thrown on the table. The young man remarked the greedy glance which shone in the dark eyes of his neighbour. "Eh," he said negligently, "this money is not mine. I was expressing to my father my fears that he had wanted many things in my absence, and to convince me he emptied his purse on the table. Come, father," added Dantès, "put this money back in your box, unless neighbor Caderousse wants anything, and in that case it is at his service." "No, my boy, no," said Caderousse. "I am not in any want, thank God. My living is suited to my means. Keep your money, keep it, I say. One never has too much. But at the same time, my boy, I am as much obliged by your offer as if I took advantage of it." "It was offered with good will," said Dantès. "No doubt, my boy, no doubt. Well, you stand well with Monsieur Morrel, I hear, you insinuating dog, you." Monsieur Morrel has always been exceedingly kind to me, replied Dantès. Then you were wrong to refuse to dine with him. What, did you refuse to dine with him? Said old Dantès. And did he invite you to dine? Yes, my dear father, replied Edmond, smiling at his father's astonishment at the excessive honour paid to his son. And why did you refuse, my son? Enquired the old man. That I might the sooner see you again, my dear father, replied the young man. I was most anxious to see you. But it must have vexed Monsieur Morrel, good worthy man, said Caderousse. And when you are looking forward to being captain, it was wrong to annoy the owner. But I explained to him the cause of my refusal, replied Dantès, and I hope he fully understood it. Yes, but to be captain, one must do a little flattery to one's patrons. I hope to be captain without that, said Dantès. So much the better, so much the better. Nothing will give greater pleasure to all your old friends, and I know one down there behind the St. Nicholas citadel who will not be sorry to hear it. Mercédès, said the old man. Yes, my dear father, and with your permission, now I have seen you and know you are well, and have all you require, I will ask your consent to go and pay a visit to the Catalans. Go, my dear boy, said old Dantès, and heaven bless you and your wife, as it has blessed me and my son. His wife, said Caderousse. Why, how fast you go on, Father Dantès. She is not his wife yet, as it seems to me. So, but according to all probability, she soon will be, replied Edmond. Yes, yes, said Caderousse, but you were right to return as soon as possible, my boy. And why? Because Mercédès is a very fine girl, and fine girls never lack followers. She particularly has them by dozens. Really? Answered Edmond, with a smile which had in it traces of slight uneasiness. Ah, yes, continued Caderousse, and capital offers too. But you know you will be captain, and who could refuse you then? Meaning to say, replied Dantès, with a smile which but ill concealed his trouble, that if I were not a captain— Eh, said Caderousse, shaking his head. Come, come, said the sailor. I have a better opinion than you of women in general, and of Mercédès in particular, and I am certain that, captain or not, she will remain ever faithful to me. So much the better, said Caderousse. When one is going to be married, there is nothing like implicit confidence. But never mind that, my boy. Go and announce your arrival, and let her know all your hopes and prospects. I will go directly, was Edmond's reply, and embracing his father and nodding to Caderousse, he left the apartment. Caderousse lingered for a moment, then taking leave of old Dantès, he went downstairs to rejoin Danglars, who awaited him at the corner of the Rue Senac. Well, said Danglars, did you see him? I have just left him, answered Caderousse. Did he allude to his hope of being captain? He spoke of it as a thing already decided. Indeed, said Danglars. He is in too much hurry, it appears to me. Why, it seems Monsieur Morrel has promised him the thing, so that he is quite elated about it. Why, yes, he is actually insolent over the matter, has already offered me his patronage as if he were a grand personage, and proffered me a loan of money as though he were a banker. Which you refused? Most assuredly, although I might easily have accepted it, for it was I who put into his hands the first silver he ever earned. But now Monsieur Dantès has no longer any occasion for assistance. He is about to become a captain. Pooh, said Danglars, he is not one yet. Ma foi, it will be as well if he is not, answered Caderousse, for if he should be, there will be really no speaking to him. If we choose, replied Danglars, he will remain what he is, and perhaps become even less than he is. What do you mean? Nothing, I was speaking to myself. And is he still in love with the Catalan? Over head and ears, but unless I am much mistaken, there will be a storm in that quarter. Explain yourself. Why should I? It is more important than you think, perhaps. You do not like Dantès? I never like upstarts. Then tell me all you know about the Catalan. I know nothing for certain, only I have seen things which induce me to believe, as I told you, that the future captain will find some annoyance in the vicinity of the Vieille Infirmerie. What have you seen? Come, tell me. Well, every time I have seen Mercédès come into the city, she has been accompanied by a tall, strapping, black-eyed Catalan, with a red complexion, brown skin, and fierce air, whom she calls cousin. Really? And you think this cousin pays her attentions? I only suppose so. What else can a strapping chap of 21 mean with a fine wench of 17? And you say that Dantès has gone to the Catalans? He went before I came down. Let us go the same way. We will stop at La Réserve, and we can drink a glass of La Malgue whilst we wait for news." "Come along," said Caderousse, "but you pay the score." "Of course," replied Danglars, and going quickly to the designated place, they called for a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Père Pamphile had seen Dantès pass not 10 minutes before, and assured that he was at the Catalans, they sat down under the budding foliage of the planes and sycamores, in the branches of which the birds were singing their welcome to one of the first days of spring. End of chapter 2.
Chapter 3 of the Count of Monte Cristo. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 3. The Catalans. Beyond a bare, weather-worn wall, about 100 paces from the spot where the 2 friends sat looking and listening as they drank their wine, was the village of the Catalans. Long ago this mysterious colony quitted Spain, and settled on the tongue of land on which it is to this day. Whence it came no one knew, and spoke an unknown tongue. One of its chiefs, who understood Provençal, begged the commune of Marseille to give them this bare and barren promontory, where, like the sailors of old, they had run their boats ashore. The request was granted, and 3 months afterwards, around the 12 or 15 small vessels which had brought these gypsies of the sea, a small village sprang up. This village, constructed in a singular and picturesque manner, half Moorish, half Spanish, still remains, and is inhabited by descendants of the first comers, who speak the language of their fathers. For 3 or 4 centuries they have remained upon this small promontory, on which they had settled like a flight of sea-birds, without mixing with the Marseillais population, intermarrying and preserving their original customs and the costume of their mother country as they have preserved its language. Our readers will follow us along the only street of this little village, and enter with us one of the houses, which is sunburned to the beautiful dead-leaf colour peculiar to the buildings of the country, and within coated with whitewash, like a Spanish posada. A young and beautiful girl, with hair as black as jet, her eyes as velvety as a gazelle's, was leaning with her back against the wainscot, rubbing in her slender, delicately moulded fingers a bunch of heath blossoms, the flowers of which she was picking off and strewing on the floor. Her arms, bare to the elbow, brown and modelled after those of the Arlesian Venus, moved with a kind of restless impatience, and she tapped the earth with her arched and supple foot, so as to display the pure and full shape of her well-turned leg, in its red cotton, grey, and blue-clocked stocking. At 3 paces from her, seated in a chair which he balanced on 2 legs, leaning his elbow on an old worm-eaten table, was a tall young man of 20 or 22, who was looking at her with an air in which vexation and uneasiness were mingled. He questioned her with his eyes, but the firm and steady gaze of the young girl controlled his look. "You see, Mercédès," he said, "here is Easter come round again. Tell me, is this the moment for a wedding?" "I have answered you 100 times, Fernand, and really you must be very stupid to ask me again." "Well, repeat it, I beg of you, that I may at last believe it. Tell me for the 100th time that you refuse my love, which had your mother's sanction. Make me understand once for all that you are trifling with my happiness, that my life or death are nothing to you. Ah, to have dreamed for 10 years of being your husband, Mercédès, and to lose that hope, which was the only stay of my existence." "At least it was not I who ever encouraged you in that hope, Fernand," replied Mercédès. "You cannot reproach me with the slightest coquetry. I have always said to you, I love you as a brother, but do not ask from me more than sisterly affection, for my heart is another's. Is that not true, Fernand?" "Yes, that is very true, Mercédès," replied the young man. "Yes, you have been cruelly frank with me. But do you forget that it is among the Catalans a sacred law to intermarry?" "You mistake, Fernand. It is not a law, but merely a custom, and, I pray of you, do not cite this custom in your favour. You are included in the conscription, Fernand, and are only at liberty on sufferance, liable at any moment to be called upon to take up arms. Once a soldier, what would you do with me, a poor orphan, forlorn, without fortune, with nothing but a half-ruined hut and a few ragged nets, the miserable inheritance left by my father to my mother, and by my mother to me? She has been dead a year, and you know, Fernand, I have subsisted almost entirely on public charity. Sometimes you pretend I am useful to you, and that is an excuse to share with me the produce of your fishing. And I accept it, Fernand, because you are the son of my father's brother, because we were brought up together, and still more because it would give you so much pain if I refuse. But I feel very deeply that this fish which I go and sell, and with the produce of which I buy the flax I spin, I feel very keenly, Fernand, that this is charity. And if it were, Mercédès, poor and lone as you are, you suit me as well as the daughter of the first ship-owner or the richest banker of Marseilles. What do such as we desire but a good wife and careful housekeeper, and where can I look for these better than in you?" "Fernand," answered Mercédès, shaking her head, "a woman becomes a bad manager, and who shall say she will remain an honest woman when she loves another man better than her husband? Rest content with my friendship, for I say once more that this is all I can promise, and I will promise no more than I can bestow." "I understand," replied Fernand. "You can endure your own wretchedness patiently, but you are afraid to share mine. Well, Mercédès, beloved by you, I would tempt fortune. You would bring me good luck, and I should become rich. I could extend my occupation as a fisherman, might get a place as clerk in a warehouse, and become in time a dealer myself." "You could do no such thing, Fernand. You are a soldier, and if you remain at the Catalans, it is because there is no war. So remain a fisherman, and be contented with my friendship, as I cannot give you more." "Well, I will do better, Mercédès. I will be a sailor. Instead of the costume of our fathers, which you despise, I will wear a varnished hat, a striped shirt, and a blue jacket, with an anchor on the buttons. Wouldn't that dress please you?" "What do you mean?" asked Mercédès, with an angry glance. "What do you mean? I do not understand you." "I mean, Mercédès, that you are thus harsh and cruel with me, because you are expecting someone who is thus attired. But perhaps he whom you await is inconstant, or if he is not, the sea is so to him." "Fernand," cried Mercédès, "I believed you were good-hearted, and I was mistaken. Fernand, you are wicked to call to your aid jealousy and the anger of God. Yes, I will not deny it, I do await, and I do love him of whom you speak. And if he does not return, instead of accusing him of the inconstancy which you insinuate, I will tell you that he died loving me and me only." The young girl made a gesture of rage. "I understand you, Fernand. You would be revenged on him because I do not love you. You would cross your Catalan knife with his dirk. What end would that answer? To lose you my friendship if he were conquered, and see that friendship changed into hate if you were the victor. Believe me, to seek a quarrel with a man is a bad method of pleasing the woman who loves that man. No, Fernand, you will not thus give way to evil thoughts. Unable to have me for your wife, you will content yourself with having me for your friend and sister. And besides," she added, her eyes troubled and moistened with tears, Wait, Fernand. You said just now that the sea was treacherous, and he has been gone 4 months, and during these 4 months there have been some terrible storms." Fernand made no reply, nor did he attempt to check the tears which flowed down the cheeks of Mercédès, although for each of these tears he would have shed his heart's blood. But these tears flowed for another. He arose, paced a while up and down the hut, and then, suddenly stopping before Mercédès, with his eyes glowing and his hands clinched, "Say, Mercédès," he said, "once for all, is this your final determination?" "I love Edmond Dantès," the young girl calmly replied, "and none but Edmond shall ever be my husband." "And you will always love him?" "As long as I live." Fernand let fall his head like a defeated man, heaved a sigh that was like a groan, and then suddenly looking her full in the face, with clinched teeth and expanded nostrils, said, "But if he is dead—" "If he is dead, I shall die too." "If he has forgotten you—" "Mercédès!" called a joyous voice from without. "Mercédès!" "Ah!" exclaimed the young girl, blushing with delight, and fairly leaping in excess of love. "You see he has not forgotten me, for here he is!" And rushing towards the door, she opened it, saying, "Here, Edmond, here I am!" Fernand, pale and trembling, drew back, like a traveller at the sight of a serpent, and fell into a chair beside him. Edmond and Mercédès were clasped in each other's arms. The burning Marseilles sun, which shot into the room with the open door, covered them with a flood of light. At first they saw nothing around them. Their intense happiness isolated them from all the rest of the world, and they only spoke in broken words, which are the tokens of a joy so extreme that they seem rather the expression of sorrow. Suddenly Edmond saw the gloomy, pale, and threatening countenance of Fernand, as it was defined in the shadow. By a movement for which he could scarcely account to himself, the young Catalan placed his hand on the knife in his belt. "Ah, your pardon," said Dantès, frowning in his turn. "I did not perceive that there were three of us." Then, turning to Mercédès, he inquired, "Who is this gentleman?" "One who will be your best friend, Dantès, for he is my friend, my cousin, my brother. It is Fernand, the man whom, after you, Edmond, I love best in all the world. Do you not remember him?" "Yes," said Dantès, and without relinquishing Mercédès' hand clasped in one of his own, he extended the other to the Catalan with a cordial air. But Fernand, instead of responding to this amiable gesture, remained mute and trembling. Edmond then cast his eyes scrutinizingly at the agitated and embarrassed Mercédès, and then again on the gloomy and menacing Fernand. This look told him all, and his anger waxed hot. "I did not know when I came with such haste to you that I was to meet an enemy here." "An enemy!" cried Mercédès, with an angry look at her cousin. "An enemy in my house, do you say, Edmond? If I believed that, I would place my arm under yours and go with you to Marseilles, leaving the house to return it no more." Fernand's eye darted lightning. "And should any misfortune occur to you, dear Edmond," she continued, with the same calmness which proved to Fernand that the young girl had read the very inmost depths of his sinister thought, "if misfortune should occur to you, I would ascend the highest point of the Cape des Morgions, and cast myself headlong from it." Fernand became deadly pale. "But you are deceived, Edmond," she continued. "You have no enemy here. There is no one but Fernand, my brother, who will grasp your hand as a devoted friend." And at these words the young girl fixed her imperious look on the Catalan, who, as if fascinated by it, came slowly towards Edmond and offered him his hand. His hatred, like a powerless though furious wave, was broken against the strong ascendancy which Mercédès exercised over him. Scarcely, however, had he touched Edmond's hand than he felt he had done all he could do, and rushed hastily out of the house. "Oh!" he exclaimed, running furiously and tearing his hair. "Oh, who will deliver me from this man? Wretched, wretched that I am!" "Hallo, Catalan! Hallo, Fernand! Where are you running to?" exclaimed a voice. The young man stopped suddenly, looked around him, and perceived Caderousse sitting at a table with Danglars under an arbor. "Well," said Caderousse, "why don't you come? Are you really in such a hurry that you have no time to pass the day with your friends?" "Particularly when they have still a full bottle before them," added Danglars. Fernand looked at them both with a stupefied air, but did not say a word. "He seems besotted," said Danglars, pushing Caderousse with his knee. "Are we mistaken, and is Dantès triumphant in spite of all we have believed?" "Why, we must inquire into that," was Caderousse's reply, and turning towards the young man, said, "Well, Catalan, can't you make up your mind?" Fernand wiped away the perspiration steaming from his brow, and slowly entered the arbour, whose shade seemed to restore somewhat of calmness to his senses, and whose coolness somewhat of refreshment to his exhausted body. "Good day," said he. "You called me, didn't you?" And he fell, rather than sat, down on one of the seats which surrounded the table. "I called you because you were running like a madman, and I was afraid you would throw yourself into the sea," said Caderousse, laughing. "Why, when a man has friends, they are not only to offer him a glass of wine, but moreover to prevent his swallowing 3 or 4 pints of water unnecessarily." Fernand gave a groan which resembled a sob, and dropped his head into his hands, his elbows leaning on the table. "Well, Fernand, I must say," said Caderousse, beginning the conversation with that brutality of the common people in which curiosity destroys all diplomacy, "you look uncommonly like a rejected lover," and he burst into a hoarse laugh. "Bah!" said Danglars, "a lad of his make was not born to be unhappy in love. You are laughing at him, Caderousse." "No," he replied, "only hark how he sighs." "Come, come, Fernand," said Caderousse, "hold up your head and answer us. It's not polite not to reply to friends who ask news of your health." "My health is well enough," said Fernand, clinching his hands without raising his head. "Ah, you see, Danglars," said Caderousse, winking at his friend, "this is how it is. Fernand, whom you see here, is a good and brave Catalan, one of the best fishermen in Marseilles, and he is in love with a very fine girl named Mercédès. But it appears, unfortunately, that the fine girl is in love with the mate of the Pharaon, and as the Pharaon arrived today, why, you understand." "No, I do not understand," said Danglars. "Poor Fernand has been dismissed," continued Caderousse. "Well, and what then?" said Fernand, lifting up his head and looking at Caderousse like a man who looks for someone on whom to vent his anger. "Mercédès is not accountable to any person, is she? Is she not free to love whomsoever she will?" "Oh, if you take it in that sense," said Caderousse, "it is another thing. But I thought you were a Catalan, and they told me the Catalans were not men to allow themselves to be supplanted by a rival. It was even told me that Fernand, especially, was terrible in his vengeance." Fernand smiled piteously. "A lover is never terrible," he said. "Poor fellow!" remarked Danglars, affecting to pity the young man from the bottom of his heart. "Why, you see, he did not expect to see Dantès return so suddenly. He thought he was dead, perhaps. Or perchance faithless. These things always come on us more severely when they come suddenly." "Ah, ma foi, under any circumstances," said Caderousse, who drank as he spoke, and on whom the fumes of the wine began to take effect, "under any circumstances, Fernand is not the only person put out by the fortunate arrival of Dantès, is he, Danglars?" "No, you are right, and I should say that would bring him ill luck." "Well, never mind," answered Caderousse, pouring out a glass of wine for Fernand, and filling his own for the 8th or 9th time, while Danglars had merely sipped his. "Never mind, in the meantime he marries Mercédès, the lovely Mercédès, at least he returns to do that." During this time Danglars fixed his piercing gaze on the young man, on whose heart Caderousse's words fell like molten lead. "And when is the wedding to be?" he asked. "Oh, it is not yet fixed," murmured Fernand. "No, but it will be," said Caderousse, "as surely as Dantès will be captain of the Pharaon, eh, Danglars?" Danglars shuddered at this unexpected attack, and turned to Caderousse, whose countenance he scrutinized, to try and detect whether the blow was premeditated, but he read nothing but envy in a countenance already rendered brutal and stupid by drunkenness. "Well," said he, filling the glasses, "let us drink to Captain Edmond Dantès, husband of the beautiful Catalan." Caderousse raised his glass to his mouth with unsteady hand, and swallowed the contents at a gulp. Fernand dashed his on the ground. "Eh, eh, eh!" stammered Caderousse. What do I see down there by the wall, in the direction of the Catalans? Look, Fernand, your eyes are better than mine. I believe I see double. You know wine is a deceiver, but I should say it was two lovers walking side by side and hand in hand. Heaven forgive me, they do not know that we can see them, and they are actually embracing." Danglars did not lose one pang that Fernand endured. "Do you know them, Fernand?" he said. "Yes," was the reply in a low voice. "It is Edmond and Mercédès." "Ah, see there now," said Caderousse, "and I did not recognize them. Hallo, Dantès! Hallo, hallo, lovely damsel! Come this way, and let us know when the wedding is to be, for Fernand here is so obstinate he will not tell us." "Hold your tongue, will you?" said Danglars, pretending to restrain Caderousse, who, with the tenacity of drunkards, leaned out of the arbor. "Try to stand upright, and let the lovers make love without interruption. See, look at Fernand and follow his example. He is well behaved." Fernand, probably excited beyond bearing, pricked by Danglars, as the bull is by the bandilleros, was about to rush out, for he had risen from his seat and seemed to be collecting himself to dash headlong upon his rival, when Mercédès, smiling and graceful, lifted up her lovely head and looked at them with her clear and bright eyes. At this Fernand recollected her threat of dying if Edmond died, and dropped again heavily on his seat. Danglars looked at the two men, one after the other, the one brutalized by liquor, the other overwhelmed with love. "I shall get nothing from these fools," he muttered, "and I am very much afraid of being here between a drunkard and a coward. Here's an envious fellow making himself boozy on wine, when he ought to be nursing his wrath, and here is a fool who sees the woman he loves stolen from under his nose, and takes on like a big baby. Yet this Catalan has eyes that glisten like those of the vengeful Spaniards, Sicilians, and Calabrians, and the other has fists big enough to crush an ox at one blow. Unquestionably, Edmond's star is in the ascendant, and he will marry the splendid girl. He will be captain too, and laugh at us all, unless—" a sinister smile passed over Danglars' lips, "unless I take a hand in the affair," he added. "Halloo!" continued Caderousse, half rising, and with his fist on the table. "Halloo, Edmond! Do you not see your friends, or are you too proud to speak to them?" "No, my dear fellow," replied Dantès, "I am not proud, but I am happy, and happiness blinds, I think, more than pride." "Ah, very well, that's an explanation," said Caderousse. "How do you do, Madame Dantès?" Mercédès curtsied gravely, and said, "That is not my name, and in my country it bodes ill fortune, they say, to call a young girl by the name of her betrothed before he becomes her husband. So call me Mercédès, if you please." "We must excuse our worthy neighbor Caderousse," said Dantès. "He is so easily mistaken." "So then the wedding is to take place immediately, Monsieur Dantès," said Danglars, bowing to the young people. "As soon as possible, Monsieur Danglars. Today all preliminaries will be arranged at my father's, and tomorrow, or next day at latest, the wedding festival here at La Réserve. My friends will be there, I hope, that is to say, you are invited, Monsieur Danglars, and you, Caderousse." "And Fernand," said Caderousse with a chuckle, "Fernand too is invited." "My wife's brother is my brother," said Edmond, "and we, Mercédès and I, should be very sorry if he were absent at such a time." Fernand opened his mouth to reply, but his voice died on his lips, and he could not utter a word. "Today the preliminaries, tomorrow or next day the ceremony. You are in a hurry, captain." "Danglars," said Edmond, smiling, "I will say to you as Mercédès said just now to Caderousse, do not give me a title which does not belong to me. That may bring me bad luck." "Your pardon," replied Danglars. "I merely said you seemed in a hurry, and we have lots of time. The Pharaon cannot be under way again in less than 3 months." "We are always in a hurry to be happy, Monsieur Danglars, for when we have suffered a long time we have great difficulty in believing in good fortune. But it is not selfishness alone that makes me thus in haste. I must go to Paris." "Ah, really? To Paris? And it will be the first time you have ever been there, Dantès?" "Yes." "Have you business there?" "Not of my own, the last commission of poor Captain Leclerc. You know to what I allude, Danglars. It is sacred. Besides, I shall only take the time to go and return." "Yes, yes, I understand," said Danglars, and then in a low voice he added, "To Paris, no doubt to deliver the letter which the Grand Marshal gave him. Ah, this letter gives me an idea, a capital idea. Ah, Dantès, my friend, you are not yet registered number 1 on board the good ship Pharaon." Then turning towards Edmond, who was walking away, "A pleasant journey!" he cried. "Thank you," said Edmond with a friendly nod, and the two lovers continued on their way, as calm and joyous as if they were the very elect of heaven. Chapter
4 of the Count of Monte Cristo. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 4. Conspiracy. Danglars followed Edmond and Mercédès with his eyes until the two lovers disappeared behind one of the angles of Fort St. Nicholas. Then turning around, he perceived Ferdinand, who had fallen pale and trembling into his chair, while Caderousse stammered out the words of a drinking song. "Well, my dear sir," said Danglars to Ferdinand, "here is a marriage which does not appear to make everybody happy." "It drives me to despair," said Ferdinand. "Do you then love Mercédès?" "I adore her." "For long?" "As long as I have known her, always." "And you sit there, tearing your hair, instead of seeking to remedy your condition? I did not think that was the way of your people." "What would you have me do?" said Ferdinand. "How do I know? Is it my affair? I am not in love with Mademoiselle Mercédès. But for you, in the words of the Gospel, seek and you shall find." "I have found already." "What?" "I would stab the man, but the woman told me that if any misfortune happened to her betrothed, she would kill herself." "Pooh! Women say those things, but never do them. You do not know Mercédès. What she threatens, she will do." "Idiot," murmured Danglars. "Whether she kill herself or not, what matter, provided Dantès is not captain?" "Before Mercédès should die," replied Ferdinand, with the accents of unshaken resolution, "I would die myself." "That's what I call love," said Caderousse, with a voice more tipsy than ever. "That's love, or I don't know what love is." "Come," said Danglars, "you appear to me a good sort of fellow, and hang me, I should like to help you, but—" "Yes," said Caderousse, "but how?" "My dear fellow," replied Danglars, "you are 3 parts drunk. Finish the bottle, and you will be completely so. Drink then, and do not meddle with what we are discussing, for that requires all one's wit and cool judgment." "I? Drunk?" said Caderousse. "Well, that is a good one. I could drink 4 more such bottles. They are no bigger than cologne flasks. Père Pamphile, more wine." And Caderousse rattled his glass upon the table. "You were saying, sir," said Ferdinand, awaiting with great anxiety the end of this interrupted remark. "What was I saying? I forget. This drunken Caderousse has made me lose the thread of my sentence." "Drunk if you like, so much the worse for those who fear wine, for it is because they have bad thoughts which they are afraid the liquor will extract from their heart." And Caderousse began to sing the last lines of a song very popular at the time. "The wicked are great drinkers of water, as the flood proved once for all." "You said, sir, you would like to help me, but—" "Yes, but I added, to help you it would be sufficient that Dantès did not marry her you love, and the marriage may easily be thwarted, methinks, and yet Dantès need not die." "Death alone can separate them," remarked Ferdinand. "You talk like a noodle, my friend," said Caderousse, "and here is Danglars, who is a wide-awake, clever, deep fellow, who will prove to you that you are wrong. Prove it, Danglars. I have answered for you. Say there is no need why Dantès should die. It would, indeed, be a pity he should. Dantès is a good fellow. I like Dantès. Dantès, your health." Ferdinand rose impatiently. "Let him run on," said Danglars, restraining the young man. "Drunk as he is not much out in what he says." "Absence," severs as well as death, and if the walls of a prison were between Edmond and Mercedes, they would be as effectually separated as if he lay under a tombstone. Yes, but one gets out of prison, said Caderousse, who with what sense was left in him listened eagerly to the conversation. And when one gets out, and one's name is Edmond Dantès, one seeks revenge. What matters that? Muttered Ferdinand. And why, I should like to know, persisted Caderousse, should they put Dantès in prison? He has not robbed or killed or murdered. Hold your tongue, said Danglars. I won't hold my tongue, replied Caderousse. I say I want to know why they should put Dantès in prison. I like Dantès. Dantès, your health, and he swallowed another glass of wine. Danglars saw in the muddled look of the tailor the progress of his intoxication, and turning toward Ferdinand, said, Well, you understand there is no need to kill him. Certainly not, if, as you said just now, you have the means of having Dantès arrested. Have you that means? It is to be found for the searching. But why should I meddle in this matter? It is no affair of mine. I know not why you meddle, said Ferdinand, seizing his arm. But this I know. You have some motive of personal hatred against Dantès, for who himself hates is never mistaken in the sentiments of others. I? Motives of hatred against Dantès? None, on my word. I saw you were unhappy, and your unhappiness interested me. That's all. But since you believe I act for my own account, adieu, my dear friend. Get out of the affair as best you may. And Danglars rose as if he meant to depart. No, no, said Ferdinand, restraining him. Stay. It is of little consequence to me, at the end of the matter, whether you have any angry feelings or not against Dantès. I hate him. I confess it openly. Do you find the means, I will execute it, provided it is not to kill that man, for Mercedes has declared she will kill herself if Dantès is killed. Caderousse, who had let his head drop on the table, now raised it, and looking at Ferdinand with his dull and fishy eyes, he said, Kill Dantès? Who talks of killing Dantès? I won't have him killed. I won't. He is my friend, and this morning offered to share his money with me, as I shared mine with him. I won't have Dantès killed. I won't. And who said a word about killing Dantès, muddlehead? Replied Danglars. We were merely joking. Drink to his health. And he added, filling Caderousse's glass, Do not interfere with us. Yes, yes, Dantès' good health, said Caderousse, emptying his glass. Here's to his health. His health, hurrah! But the means, said Ferdinand. Have you not hit upon any? Asked Danglars. No, you undertook to do so. True, replied Danglars. The French have the superiority over the Spaniards, that the Spaniards ruminate while the French invent. Do you invent, then? Said Ferdinand impatiently. Waiter, said Danglars. Pen, ink, and paper. Pen, ink, and paper, muttered Ferdinand. Yes, I am a supercargo. Pen, ink, and paper are my tools, and without my tools I am fit for nothing. Pen, ink, and paper, then, called Ferdinand loudly. There's what you want on that table, said the waiter. Bring them here. The waiter did as he was desired. When one thinks, said Caderousse, letting his hand drop on the paper, there is here withal to kill a man more sure than if we waited at the corner of a wood to assassinate him. I've always had more dread of pen, a bottle of ink, and a sheet of paper than of a sword and a pistol. The fellow is not so drunk as he appears to be, said Danglars. Give him some more wine, Ferdinand. Ferdinand filled Caderousse's glass, who, like the confirmed toper he was, lifted his hand from the paper and seized the glass. The Catalan watched him until Caderousse, almost overcome by this fresh assault on his senses, rested, or rather dropped, his glass upon the table. Well, resumed the Catalan, as he saw the final glimmer of Caderousse's reason vanishing before the last glass of wine. Well, then, I should say, for instance, resumed Danglars, that if after a voyage such as Dantès has just made, in which he touched at the island of Elba, someone were to denounce him to the king's procureur as a Bonaparte agent. I will denounce him, exclaimed the young man hastily. Yes, but they will make you sign your declaration and confront you with him you have denounced. I will supply you with the means of supporting your accusation, for I know the fact well. But Dantès cannot remain forever in prison, and one day or the other he will leave it, and the day when he comes out, woe betide him who was the cause of his incarceration. Oh, I should wish nothing better than that he would come and seek a quarrel with me. Yes, and Mercedes? Mercedes, who will detest you if you have only the misfortune to scratch the skin of her dearly beloved Edmond. True, replied Ferdinand. No, no, continued Danglars. If we resolve on such a step, it would be much better to take, as I now do, this pen, dip it into this ink, and write with the left hand, that the writing may not be recognized, the denunciation we propose. And Danglars, uniting practice with theory, wrote with his left hand, and in a writing reversed from his usual style, and totally unlike it, the following lines, which he handed to Ferdinand, and which Ferdinand read in an undertone. The Honourable, the King's Attorney, is informed by a friend of the throne and religion, that one Edmond Dantès, mate of the ship Pharaon, arrived this morning from Smyrna, may have touched at Naples and Portoferraro, has been entrusted by Murat with a letter for the usurper, and by the usurper with a letter for the Bonapartist committee in Paris. Proof of this crime will be found on arresting him, for the letter will be found upon him, or at his father's, or in his cabin on board the Pharaon. Very good, resumed Danglars. Now your revenge looks like common sense, for in no way can it revert to yourself, and the matter will thus work its own way. There is nothing to do now but fold the letter as I am doing, and write upon it, to the King's Attorney. That's all settled. And Danglars wrote the address as he spoke. Yes, and that's all settled, exclaimed Caderousse, who by a last effort of intellect had followed the reading of the letter, and instinctively comprehended all the misery which such a denunciation must entail. Yes, and that's all settled, only it will be an infamous shame, and he stretched out his hand to reach the letter. Yes, said Danglars, taking it from beyond his reach, and as what I say and do is merely a jest, and I amongst the first and foremost shall be sorry if anything happens to Dantès, the worthy Dantès. Look here. And taking the letter, he squeezed it up in his hand and threw it in a corner of the arbor. All right, said Caderousse. Dantès is my friend, and I won't have him ill-used. And who thinks of using him ill? Certainly not I nor Ferdinand, said Danglars, rising and looking at the young man, who still remained seated, but whose eye was fixed on the denunciatory sheet of paper flung into the corner. In this case, replied Caderousse, let's have some more wine. I wish to drink to the health of Edmond and the lovely Mercedes. You have had too much already, drunkard, said Danglars, and if you continue, you will be compelled to sleep here, because unable to stand on your legs. I, said Caderousse, rising with all the offended dignity of a drunken man. I can't keep on my legs? Why, I'll wager I can go up into the belfry of the Écoles without staggering too. Done, said Danglars. I'll take your bet, but tomorrow, today it's time to return. Give me your arm, and let us go. Very well, let us go, said Caderousse. But I don't want your arm at all. Come, Ferdinand. Won't you return to Marseille with us? No, said Ferdinand. I shall return to the Catalans. You're wrong. Come with us to Marseille. Come along. I will not. What do you mean, you will not? Well, just as you like, my prince. There's liberty for all the world. Come along, Danglars, and let the young gentleman return to the Catalans, if he chooses. Danglars took advantage of Caderousse's temper at the moment to take him off towards Marseille by the Pont Saint-Victor, staggering as he went. When they had advanced about 20 yards, Danglars looked back and saw Ferdinand stoop, pick up the crumpled paper, and putting it in his pocket, then rush out of the arbor towards Pilon. Well, said Caderousse, why, what a lie he told. He said he was going to Catalans, and he is going to the city. Hello, Ferdinand. Oh, you don't see straight, said Danglars. He's gone right enough. Well, said Caderousse, I should have said not. How treacherous wine is. Come, come, said Danglars to himself. Now the thing is at work, and it will effect its purpose unassisted. End of Chapter 4.
Chapter 5 of the Count of Monte Cristo. The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 5. The Marriage Feast. The morning sun rose clear and resplendent, touching the foamy waves into a network of ruby-tinted light. The feast had been made ready on the second floor at La Réserve, with whose arbour the reader is already familiar. The apartment destined for the purpose was spacious, and lighted by a number of windows, over each of which was written in golden letters, for some inexplicable reason, the name of one of the principal cities of France. Beneath these windows a wooden balcony extended the entire length of the house. And although the entertainment was fixed for 12 o'clock, an hour previous to that time the balcony was filled with impatient and expectant guests, consisting of the favoured part of the crew of the Pharaon, and other personal friends of the bridegroom, the whole of whom had arrayed themselves in their choicest costumes, in order to do greater honour to the occasion. Various rumours were afloat to the effect that the owners of the Pharaon had promised to attend the nuptial feast, but all seemed unanimous in doubting that an act of such rare and exceeding condescension could possibly be intended. Danglars, however, who now made his appearance, accompanied by Caderousse, effectually confirmed the report, stating that he had recently conversed with M. Morrel, who had himself assured him of his intention to dine at La Réserve. In fact, a moment later M. Morrel appeared, and was saluted with an enthusiastic burst of applause from the crew of the Pharaon, who hailed the visit of the shipowner as a sure indication that the man whose wedding feast he thus delighted to honour would ere long be first in command of the ship. And as Dantès was universally beloved on board his vessel, the sailors put no restraint on their tumultuous joy at finding that the opinion and choice of their superiors so exactly coincided with their own. With the entrance of M. Morrel, Danglars and Caderousse were dispatched in search of the bridegroom, to convey to him the intelligence of the arrival of the important personage whose coming had created such a lively sensation, and to beseech him to make haste. Danglars and Caderousse set off upon their errand at full speed. But ere they had gone many steps, they perceived a group advancing towards them, composed of the betrothed pair, a party of young girls in attendance on the bride, by whose side walked Dantès' father, the whole brought up by Fernand, whose lips wore their usual sinister smile. Neither Mercédès nor Edmond observed the strange expression of his countenance. They were so happy that they were conscious only of the sunshine and the presence of each other. Having acquitted themselves of their errand and exchanged a hearty shake of the hand with Edmond, Danglars and Caderousse took their places beside Fernand and old Dantès, the latter of whom attracted universal notice. The old man was attired in a suit of glistening watered silk, trimmed with steel buttons, beautifully cut and polished. His thin but wiry legs were arrayed in a pair of richly embroidered clocked stockings, evidently of English manufacture, while from his three-cornered hat depended a long streaming knot of white and blue ribbons. Thus he came along, supporting himself on a curiously carved stick, his aged countenance lit up with happiness, looking for all the world like one of the aged dandies of 1796, parading the newly opened garden of the Tuileries in Luxembourg. Beside him glided Caderousse, whose desire to partake of the good things provided for the wedding party had induced him to become reconciled to the Dantès, father and son, although there still lingered in his mind a faint and imperfect recollection of the events of the preceding night, just as the brain retains on waking in the morning the dim and misty outline of a dream. As Danglars approached the disappointed lover, he cast on him a look of deep meaning, while Fernand, as he slowly paced behind the happy pair, who seemed in their own unmixed content to have entirely forgotten that such a being as himself existed, was pale and abstracted. Occasionally, however, a deep flush would overspread his countenance, and a nervous contraction distort his features, while, with an agitated and restless gaze, he would glance in the direction of Marseilles, like one who either anticipated or foresaw some great and important event. Dantès himself was simply but becomingly clad in the dress peculiar to the merchant service, a costume somewhat between a military and a civil garb, and with his fine countenance radiant with joy and happiness, a more perfect specimen of manly beauty could scarcely be imagined. Lovely as the Greek girls of Cyprus or Chios, Mercédès boasted the same bright flashing eyes of jet and ripe round coral lips. She moved with the light free step of an Alcéenne or an Andalusian. One more practised in the arts of great cities would have hid her blushes beneath a veil, or at least have cast down her thickly fringed lashes, so as to have concealed the liquid lustre of her animated eyes. But on the contrary, the delighted girl looked around her with a smile that seemed to say, "If you are my friends, rejoice with me, for I am very happy." As soon as the bridal party came in sight of La Réserve, Monsieur Morrel descended and came forth to meet it, followed by the soldiers and sailors there assembled, to whom he had repeated the promise already given, that Dantès should be the successor to the late Captain Leclerc. Edmond, at the approach of his patron, respectfully placed the arm of his affianced bride within that of Monsieur Morrel, who forthwith, conducting her up the flight of wooden steps leading to the chamber in which the feast was prepared, was gaily followed by the guests, beneath whose heavy tread the slight structure creaked and groaned for the space of several minutes. "Father," said Mercédès, stopping when she had reached the centre of the table, "sit, I pray you, on my right hand. On my left I will place him who has ever been as a brother to me," pointing with a soft and gentle smile to Fernand. But her words and looks seemed to inflict the direst torture on him, for his lips became ghastly pale, and even beneath the dark hue of his complexion the blood might be seen retreating, as though some sudden pang drove it back to the heart. During this time, Dantès, at the opposite side of the table, had been occupied in similarly placing his most honoured guests. Monsieur Morrel was seated at his right hand, Danglars at his left, while at a sign from Edmond the rest of the company ranged themselves as they found it most agreeable. Then they began to pass around the dusky piquant Alsacian sausages, and lobsters in their dazzling red cuirasses, prawns of large size and brilliant colour, the echinus with its prickly outside and dainty morsel within, the clovis, esteemed by the epicures of the south as more than rivalling the exquisite flavour of the oyster, all the delicacies, in fact, that are cast up by the wash of waters on the sandy beach, and styled by the grateful fishermen fruits of the sea. "A pretty silence, truly," said the old father of the bridegroom, as he carried to his lips a glass of wine of the hue and brightness of the topaz, and which had just been placed before Mercédès herself. "Now would anybody think that this room contained a happy, merry party, who desire nothing better than to laugh and dance the hours away?" "Ah," sighed Caderousse, "a man cannot always feel happy because he is about to be married." "The truth is," replied Dantès, "that I am too happy for noisy mirth." "If that is what you meant by your observation, my worthy friend, you are right. Joy takes a strange effect at times. It seems to oppress us almost the same as sorrow." Danglars looked towards Fernand, whose excitable nature received and betrayed each fresh impression. "Why, what ails you?" asked he of Edmond. "Do you fear any approaching evil? I should say that you were the happiest man alive at this instant." "And that is the very thing that alarms me," returned Dantès. "Man does not appear to me to be intended to enjoy felicity so unmixed. Happiness is like the enchanted palaces we read of in our childhood, where fierce fiery dragons defend the entrance and approach, and monsters of all shapes and kinds, requiring to be overcome ere victory is ours. I own that I am lost in wonder to find myself promoted to an honor of which I feel myself unworthy, that of being the husband of Mercédès." "Nay, nay," cried Caderousse, smiling, "you have not attained that honor yet. Mercédès is not yet your wife. Just assume the tone and manner of a husband, and see how she will remind you that your hour is not yet come." The bride blushed, while Fernand, restless and uneasy, seemed to start at every fresh sound, and from time to time wiped away the large drops of perspiration that gathered on his brow. "Well, never mind that, neighbor Caderousse. It is not worth while to contradict me for such a trifle as that. 'Tis true that Mercédès is not actually my wife, but," added he, drawing out his watch, "in an hour and a half she will be." A general exclamation of surprise ran round the table, with the exception of the elder Dantès, whose laugh displayed the still perfect beauty of his large white teeth. Mercédès looked pleased and gratified, while Fernand grasped the handle of his knife with a convulsive clutch. "In an hour?" inquired Danglars, turning pale. "How is that, my friend?" "Why, thus it is," replied Dantès. "Thanks to the influence of M. Morrel, to whom, next to my father, I owe every blessing I enjoy, every difficulty has been removed. We have purchased permission to waive the usual delay, and at 2:30 the mayor of Marseille will be waiting for us at the city hall. Now, as 1:15 has already struck, I do not consider I have asserted too much in saying that in another hour and 30 minutes Mercédès will have become Madame Dantès." Fernand closed his eyes. A burning sensation passed across his brow, and he was compelled to support himself by the table to prevent his falling from his chair. But in spite of all his efforts, he could not refrain from uttering a deep groan, which, however, was lost amid the noisy felicitations of the company. "Upon my word," cried the old man, "you make short work of this kind of affair. Arrived here only yesterday morning, and married today at 3 o'clock. Commend me to a sailor for going the quick way to work." "But," asked Danglars in a timid tone, "how did you manage about the other formalities, the contract, the settlement?" "The contract," answered Dantès, laughingly. "It didn't take long to fix that. Mercédès has no fortune. I have none to settle on her. So you see our papers were quickly written out, and certainly do not come very expensive." This joke elicited a fresh burst of applause. "So that what we presume to be merely the betrothal feast turns out to be the actual wedding dinner," said Danglars. "No, no," answered Dantès. "Don't imagine I am going to put you off in that shabby manner. Tomorrow morning I start for Paris, 4 days to go and the same to return, with 1 day to discharge the commission entrusted to me, is all the time I shall be absent. I shall be back here by the 1st of March, and on the 2nd I give my real marriage feast." This prospect of fresh festivity redoubled the hilarity of the guests to such a degree that the elder Dantès, who, at the commencement of the repast, had commented upon the silence that prevailed, now found it difficult, amid the general din of voices, to obtain a moment's tranquillity in which to drink to the health and prosperity of the bride and bridegroom. Dantès, perceiving the affectionate eagerness of his father, responded by a look of grateful pleasure, while Mercédès glanced at the clock and made an expressive gesture to Edmond. Around the table reigned that noisy hilarity which usually prevails at such a time among people sufficiently free from the demands of social position not to feel the trammels of etiquette. Such as at the commencement of the repast had not been able to seat themselves according to their inclination rose unceremoniously, and sought out more agreeable companions. Everybody talked at once, without waiting for a reply, and each one seemed to be contented with expressing his or her own thoughts. Fernand's paleness appeared to have communicated itself to Danglars. As for Fernand himself, he seemed to be enduring the tortures of the damned. Unable to rest, he was among the first to quit the table, and as though seeking to avoid the hilarious mirth that rose in such deafening sounds, he continued in utter silence to pace the further end of the salon. Caderousse approached him just as Danglars, whom Fernand seemed most anxious to avoid, had joined him in a corner of the room. "Upon my word," said Caderousse, from whose mind the friendly treatment of Dantès, united with the effect of the excellent wine he had partaken of, had effaced every feeling of envy or jealousy at Dantès' good fortune. "Upon my word, Dantès is a downright good fellow, and when I see him sitting there beside his pretty wife that is so soon to be, I cannot help thinking it would have been a great pity to have served him that trick you were planning yesterday." "Oh, there was no harm meant," answered Danglars. "At first I certainly did feel somewhat uneasy as to what Fernand might be tempted to do, but when I saw how completely he had mastered his feelings, even so far as to become one of his rival's attendants, I knew there was no further cause for apprehension." Caderousse looked full at Fernand. He was ghastly pale. "Certainly," continued Danglars, "the sacrifice was no trifling one when the beauty of the bride is concerned. Upon my soul, that future captain of mine is a lucky dog. Gad, I only wish he would let me take his place." "Shall we not set forth?" asked the sweet silvery voice of Mercédès. 2 o'clock has just struck, and you know we are expected in a quarter of an hour." To be sure," cried Dantès, eagerly quitting the table. "Let us go directly." His words were re-echoed by the whole party, with vociferous cheers. At this moment, Danglars, who had been incessantly observing every change in Fernand's look and manner, saw him stagger and fall back with an almost convulsive spasm against a seat placed near one of the open windows. At the same instant, his ear caught a sort of indistinct sound on the stairs, followed by the measured tread of soldiery, with the clanking of swords and military accoutrements. Then came a hum and buzz as of many voices, so as to deaden even the noisy mirth of the bridal party, among whom a vague feeling of curiosity and apprehension quelled every disposition to talk, and almost instantaneously the most death-like stillness prevailed. The sounds drew nearer. 3 blows were struck upon the panel of the door. The company looked at each other in consternation. "I demand admittance," said a loud voice outside the room, "in the name of the law." As no attempt was made to prevent it, the door was opened, and a magistrate, wearing his official scarf, presented himself, followed by 4 soldiers and a corporal. Uneasiness now yielded to the most extreme dread on the part of those present. "May I venture to inquire the reason of this unexpected visit?" said Monsieur Morrel, addressing the magistrate, whom he evidently knew. "There is doubtless some mistake easily explained." "If it be so," replied the magistrate, "rely upon every reparation being made. Meanwhile, I am the bearer of an order of arrest, and although I most reluctantly perform the task assigned me, it must nevertheless be fulfilled. Who among the persons here assembled answers to the name of Edmond Dantès?" Every eye was turned towards the young man, who, spite of the agitation he could not but feel, advanced with dignity, and said in a firm voice, "I am he. What is your pleasure with me?" "Edmond Dantès," replied the magistrate, "I arrest you in the name of the law." "Me!" repeated Edmond, slightly changing colour. "And wherefore, I pray?" "I cannot inform you, but you will be duly acquainted with the reasons that have rendered such a step necessary at the preliminary examination." Monsieur Morrel felt that further resistance or remonstrance was useless. He saw before him an officer delegated to enforce the law, and perfectly well knew that it would be as unavailing to seek pity from a magistrate decked with his official scarf as to address a petition to some cold marble effigy. Old Dantès, however, sprang forward. There are situations which the heart of a father or a mother cannot be made to understand. He prayed and supplicated in terms so moving that even the officer was touched, and, although firm in his duty, he kindly said, "My worthy friend, let me beg of you to calm your apprehensions. Your son has probably neglected some prescribed form or attention in registering his cargo, and it is more than probable he will be set at liberty directly he has given the information required, whether touching the health of his crew or the value of his freight." "What is the meaning of all this?" inquired Caderousse frowningly of Danglars, who had assumed an air of utter surprise. "How can I tell you?" replied he. "I am like yourself utterly bewildered at all that is going on, and cannot in the least make out what it is about." Caderousse then looked around for Fernand, but he had disappeared. The scene of the previous night now came back to his mind with startling clearness. The painful catastrophe he had just witnessed appeared effectually to have rent away the veil which the intoxication of the evening before had raised between himself and his memory. So, said he, in a hoarse and choking voice, to Danglars. "This, then, I suppose, is a part of the trick you were concerting yesterday. All I can say is, that if it be so, 'tis an ill turn, and well deserves to bring double evil on those who have projected it." "Nonsense," returned Danglars. "I tell you again, I have nothing whatever to do with it. Besides, you know very well that I tore the paper to pieces." "No, you did not," answered Caderousse. "You merely threw it by. I saw it lying in a corner." "Hold your tongue, you fool. What should you know about it? Why, you were drunk." "Where is Fernand?" inquired Caderousse. "How do I know?" replied Danglars. "Gone, as every prudent man ought to be." "To look after his own affairs, most likely. Never mind where he is. Let you and I go and see what is to be done for our poor friends." During this conversation, Dantès, after having exchanged a cheerful shake of the hand with all his sympathizing friends, had surrendered himself to the officer sent to arrest him, merely saying, "Make yourselves quite easy, my good fellows. There is some little mistake to clear up, that's all, depend upon it, and very likely I may not have to go so far as the prison to effect that." "Oh, to be sure," responded Danglars, who had now approached the group. "Nothing more than a mistake, I feel quite certain." Dantès descended the staircase, preceded by the magistrate, and followed by the soldiers. A carriage awaited him at the door. He got in, followed by 2 soldiers and the magistrate, and the vehicle drove off towards Marseilles. "Adieu, adieu, dearest Edmond," cried Mercédès, stretching out her arms to him from the balcony. The prisoner heard the cry, which sounded like the sob of a broken heart, and leaning from the coach, he called out, "Goodbye, Mercédès. We shall soon meet again." Then the vehicle disappeared round one of the turnings of Fort St. Nicholas. "Wait for me here, all of you," cried Monsieur Morrel. "I will take the first conveyance I find and hurry to Marseilles, whence I will bring you word how all is going on." "That's right," exclaimed a multitude of voices. "Go, and return as quickly as you can." This second departure was followed by a long and fearful state of terrified silence on the part of those who were left behind. The old father and Mercédès remained for some time apart, each absorbed in grief, but at length the 2 poor victims of the same blow raised their eyes, and with a simultaneous burst of feeling rushed into each other's arms. Meanwhile Fernand made his appearance, poured out for himself a glass of water with a trembling hand, then hastily swallowing it, went to sit down at the first vacant place, and this was by mere chance placed next to the seat on which poor Mercedes had fallen half fainting when released from the warm and affectionate embrace of old Dantès. Instinctively Fernand drew back his chair. "He is the cause of all this misery, I am quite sure of it," whispered Caderousse, who had never taken his eyes off Fernand, to Danglars. "I don't think so," answered the other. "He is too stupid to imagine such a scheme. I only hope the mischief will fall upon the head of whoever wrought it." "You don't mention those who aided and abetted the deed," said Caderousse. "Surely," answered Danglars, "one cannot be held responsible for every chance arrow shot into the air." "You can indeed, when the arrow lights point downward on somebody's head." Meantime, the subject of the arrest was being canvassed in every different form. "What think you, Danglars," said one of the party, turning towards him, "of this event?" "Why," replied he, "I think it just possible Dantès may have been detected with some trifling article on board ship, considered here as contraband." "But how could he have done so without your knowledge, Danglars, since you are the ship's supercargo?" "Why, as for that, I could only know what I was told respecting the merchandise with which the vessel was laden. I know she was loaded with cotton, and that she took in her freight at Alexandria from Pastret's warehouse, and at Smyrna from Pascal's. That is all I was obliged to know, and I beg I may not be asked for any further particulars." "Now I recollect," said the afflicted old father. "My poor boy told me yesterday he had got a small case of coffee, and another of tobacco for me." "There, you see," exclaimed Danglars. "Now the mischief is out. Depend upon it, the custom-house people went rummaging about the ship in our absence, and discovered poor Dantès' hidden treasures." Mercédès, however, paid no heed to this explanation of her lover's arrest. Her grief, which she had hitherto tried to restrain, now burst out in a violent fit of hysterical sobbing. "Come, come," said the old man, "be comforted, my poor child, there is still hope." "Hope," repeated Danglars. "Hope," faintly murmured Fernand, but the word seemed to die away on his pale, agitated lips, and a convulsive spasm passed over his countenance. "Good news, good news!" shouted forth one of the party stationed in the balcony on the lookout. "Here comes M. Morrel back. No doubt now we shall hear that our friend is released." Mercédès and the old man rushed to meet the ship-owner, and greeted him at the door. He was very pale. "What news?" exclaimed a general burst of voices. "Alas, my friends," replied M. Morrel, with a mournful shake of his head, "the thing has assumed a more serious aspect than I expected." "Oh, indeed, sir, he is innocent," sobbed forth Mercédès. "That I believe," answered M. Morrel, "but still he is charged." "With what?" inquired the elder Dantès. "With being an agent of the Bonapartist faction." Many of our readers may be able to recollect how formidable such an accusation became in the period at which our story is dated. A despairing cry escaped the pale lips of Mercédès. The old man sank into a chair. "Ah, Danglars," whispered Caderousse, "you have deceived me. The trick you spoke of last night has been played. But I cannot suffer a poor old man or an innocent girl to die of grief through your fault. I am determined to tell them all about it." "Be silent, you simpleton," cried Danglars, grasping him by the arm, "or I will not answer even for your own safety. Who can tell whether Dantès be innocent or guilty? The vessel did touch at Elba, where he quitted it, and passed a whole day in the island. Now, should any letters or other documents of a compromising character be found upon him, will it not be taken for granted that all who uphold him are his accomplices?" With the rapid instinct of selfishness, Caderousse readily perceived the solidity of this mode of reasoning. He gazed doubtfully, wistfully on Danglars, and then caution supplanted generosity. "Suppose we wait a while and see what comes of it," said he, casting a bewildered look on his companion. "To be sure," answered Danglars, "let us wait, by all means. If he be innocent, of course he will be set at liberty. If guilty, why, it is no use involving ourselves in a conspiracy. Let us go, then. I cannot stay here any longer." "With all my heart," replied Danglars, pleased to find the other so tractable. "Let us take ourselves out of the way, and leave things for the present to take their course." After their departure, Fernand, who had now again become the friend and protector of Mercédès, led the girl to her home, while the friends of Dantès conducted the now half-fainting man back to his abode. The rumour of Edmond's arrest as a Bonapartist agent was not slow in circulating throughout the city. "Could you ever have credited such a thing, my dear Danglars?" asked M. Morrel, as, on his return to the port for the purpose of gleaning fresh tidings of Dantès from M. de Villefort, the assistant procureur, he overtook his supercargo and Caderousse. "Could you have believed such a thing possible?" "Why, you know I told you," replied Danglars, that I considered the circumstance of his having anchored at the island of Elba as a very suspicious circumstance." "And did you mention these suspicions to any person beside myself?" "Certainly not," returned Danglars; then added in a low whisper, "You understand that, on account of your uncle, M. Policar Morrel, who served under the other government, and who does not altogether conceal what he thinks on the subject, you are strongly suspected of regretting the abdication of Napoleon. I should have feared to injure both Edmond and yourself, had I divulged my own apprehensions to a soul. I am too well aware that though a subordinate, like myself, is bound to acquaint the ship-owner with everything that occurs, there are many things he ought most carefully to conceal from all else." "'Tis well, Danglars, 'tis well," replied M. Morrel. "You are a worthy fellow, and I had already thought of your interest in the event of poor Edmond having become captain of the Pharaon." "Is it possible you were so kind?" "Yes, indeed. I had previously inquired of Dantès what was his opinion of you, and if he should have any reluctance to continue you in your post, for somehow I have perceived a sort of coolness between you." "And what was his reply?" "That he certainly did think he had given you offence in an affair which he merely referred to without entering into particulars, but that whoever possessed the good opinion and confidence of the ship's owner would have his preference also." "A hypocrite," murmured Danglars. "Poor Dantès," said Caderousse. "No one can deny his being a noble-hearted young fellow." "But meanwhile," continued M. Morrel, "here is the Pharaon without a captain." "Oh," replied Danglars, "since we cannot leave this port for the next 3 months, let us hope that ere the expiration of that period Dantès will be set at liberty." "No doubt, but in the meantime?" "I am entirely at your service, M. Morrel," answered Danglars. "You know that I am as capable of managing a ship as the most experienced captain in the service, and it will be so far advantageous to you to accept my services, that upon Edmond's release from prison, no further change will be requisite on board the Pharaon than for Dantès and myself each to resume our respective posts." "Thanks, Danglars, that will smooth over all difficulties. I fully authorize you at once to assume the command of the Pharaon, and look carefully to the unloading of her freight. Private misfortunes must never be allowed to interfere with business." "Be easy on that score, M. Morrel. But do you think we shall be permitted to see our poor Edmond?" "I will let you know that directly I have seen M. de Villefort, whom I shall endeavour to interest in Edmond's favour. I am aware he is a furious royalist, but in spite of that, and of his being king's attorney, he is a man like ourselves, and I fancy not a bad sort of one." "Perhaps not," replied Danglars, "but I hear that he is ambitious, and that's rather against him." "Well, well," returned M. Morrel, "we shall see. But now hasten on board, I will join you there ere long." So saying, the worthy ship-owner quitted the two allies, and proceeded in the direction of the Palais de Justice. "You see," said Danglars, addressing Caderousse, "the turn things have taken. Do you still feel any desire to stand up in his defence?" "Not the slightest, but yet it seems to me a shocking thing that a mere joke should lead to such consequences." "But who perpetrated that joke, let me ask? Neither you nor myself, but Fernand. You knew very well that I threw the paper into a corner of the room. Indeed, I fancied I had destroyed it." "Oh, no," replied Caderousse, "that I can answer for, you did not. I only wish I could see it now as plainly as I saw it lying all crushed and crumpled in a corner of the arbour." "Well then, if you did, depend upon it, Fernand picked it up, and either copied it or caused it to be copied. Perhaps, even, he did not take the trouble of recopying it. And now I think of it, by heavens, he may have sent the letter itself. Fortunately for me, the handwriting was disguised." "Then you were aware of Dantès being engaged in a conspiracy?" "Not I. As I before said, I thought the whole thing was a joke, nothing more. It seems, however, that I have unconsciously stumbled upon the truth." "Still," argued Caderousse, "I would give a great deal if nothing of the kind had happened, or at least that I had had no hand in it. You will see, Danglars, that it will turn out an unlucky job for both of us." "Nonsense. If any harm come of it, it should fall on the guilty person, and that, you know, is Fernand. How can we be implicated in any way? All we have got to do is to keep our own counsel, and remain perfectly quiet, not breathing a word to any living soul, and you will see that the storm will pass away without in the least affecting us." "Amen," responded Caderousse, waving his hand in token of adieu to Danglars, and bending his steps towards the Allée de Meilhan, moving his head to and fro, and muttering as he went, after the manner of one whose mind was overcharged with one absorbing idea. "So far, then," said Danglars mentally, "all has gone as I would have it. I am temporarily commander of the Pharaon, with the certainty of being permanently so, if that fool of a Caderousse can be persuaded to hold his tongue. My only fear is the chance of Dantès being released. But, there, he's in the hands of justice, and, added he with a smile, she will take her own. So saying, he leapt into a boat, desiring to be rowed on board the Pharaon, where M. Morrel had agreed to meet him. End of chapter 5.
Chapter 6 of the Count of Monte Cristo. The Count of Monte Cristo, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 6. The Deputy Procureur du Roi. In one of the aristocratic mansions built by Puget in the Rue du Grand Cour, opposite the Medusa Fountain, a second marriage feast was being celebrated almost at the same hour with the same nuptial repast given by Dantès. In this case, however, although the occasion of the entertainment was similar, the company was strikingly dissimilar. Instead of a rude mixture of sailors, soldiers, and those belonging to the humblest grade of life, the present assembly was composed of the very flower of Marseilles society. Magistrates who had resigned their office during the usurper's reign, officers who had deserted from the imperial army and joined forces with Condé, and younger members of families brought up to hate and execrate the man whom 5 years of exile would convert into a martyr, and 15 of restoration elevate to the rank of a god. The guests were still at table, and the heated and energetic conversation that prevailed betrayed the violent and vindictive passions that then agitated each dweller of the South, where unhappily, for 5 centuries religious strife had long given increased bitterness to the violence of party feeling. The emperor, now king of the petty island of Elba, after having held sovereign sway over 1/2 of the world, counting as his subjects a small population of 5,000 or 6,000 souls, after having been accustomed to hear the Vive Napoleons of 120 millions of human beings, uttered in 10 different languages, was looked upon here as a ruined man, separated forever from any fresh connection with France or claim to her throne. The magistrates freely discussed their political views. The military part of the company talked unreservedly of Moscow and Leipzig, while the women commented on the divorce of Josephine. It was not over the downfall of the man, but over the defeat of the Napoleonic idea that they rejoiced, and in this they foresaw for themselves the bright and cheering prospect of a revivified political existence. An old man decorated with the cross of St. Louis now rose and proposed the health of King Louis XVIII. It was the Marquis de Saint-Méran. This toast, recalling at once the patient exile of Hartwell and the peace-loving King of France, excited universal enthusiasm. Glasses were elevated in the air à l'anglaise, and the ladies, snatching their bouquets from their fair bosoms, strewed the table with their floral treasures. In a word, an almost poetical fervour prevailed. "Ah," said the Marquise de Saint-Méran, a woman with a stern, forbidding eye, though still noble and distinguished in appearance despite her 50 years. "Ah, these revolutionists, who have driven us from those very possessions they afterwards purchased for a mere trifle during the reign of terror, would be compelled to own, were they here, that all true devotion was on our side, since we were content to follow the fortunes of a falling monarch, while they, on the contrary, made their fortune by worshipping the rising sun. Yes, they could not help admitting that the king for whom we sacrificed rank, wealth, and station was truly our Louis the well-beloved, while their wretched usurper has been and ever will be to them their evil genius, their Napoleon the accursed. Am I not right, Villefort?" "I beg your pardon, madame. I really must pray you to excuse me, but, in truth, I was not attending to the conversation." Marquise, interposed the old nobleman who had proposed the toast. "Let the young people alone. Let me tell you, on one's wedding day there are more agreeable subjects of conversation than dry politics." "Never mind, dearest mother," said a young and lovely girl with a profusion of light brown hair, and eyes that seemed to float in liquid crystal. "'Tis all my fault for seizing upon Monsieur de Villefort so as to prevent his listening to what you said. But there, take him now. He is your own for as long as you like. Monsieur de Villefort, I beg to remind you, my mother speaks to you." "If the Marquise will deign to repeat the words I but imperfectly caught, I shall be delighted to answer," said Monsieur de Villefort. "Never mind, Renée," replied the Marquise, with a look of tenderness that seemed out of keeping with her harsh, dry features. "But however all other feelings may be withered in a woman's nature, there is always one bright smiling spot in the desert of her heart, and that is the shrine of maternal love. I forgive you. What I was saying, Villefort, was, the Bonapartists had not our sincerity, enthusiasm, or devotion." "They had, however, what supplied the place of those fine qualities," replied the young man, "and that was fanaticism. Napoleon is the Mahomet of the West, and is worshipped by his commonplace but ambitious followers not only as a leader and lawgiver, but also as the personification of equality." "He!" cried the Marquise. "Napoleon the type of equality! For mercy's sake, then, what would you call Robespierre? Come, come, do not strip the latter of his just rights to bestow them on the Corsican, who, to my mind, has usurped quite enough." "Nay, madame, I would place each of these heroes on his right pedestal, that of Robespierre on his scaffold in the Place Louis XV, that of Napoleon on the column of the Place Vendôme. The only difference consists in the opposite character of the equality advocated by these two men. One is the equality that elevates, the other is the equality that degrades. One brings a king within reach of the guillotine, the other elevates the people to a level with the throne. Observe," said Villefort, smiling, "I do not mean to deny that both these men were revolutionary scoundrels, and that the 9th Thermidor and the 4th of April in the year 1814 were lucky days for France, worthy of being gratefully remembered by every friend to monarchy and civil order, and that explains how it comes to pass that, fallen, as I trust he is forever, Napoleon has still retained a train of parasitical satellites. Still, Marquise, it has been so with other usurpers. Cromwell, for instance, who was not half so bad as Napoleon, had his partisans and advocates." "Do you know, Villefort, that you are talking in a most dreadfully revolutionary strain? But I excuse it. It is impossible to expect the son of a Girondin to be free of a small spice of the old leaven." A deep crimson suffused the countenance of Villefort. "'Tis true, madame," answered he, "that my father was a Girondin, but he was not among the number of those who voted for the king's death. He was an equal sufferer with yourself during the Reign of Terror, and had well nigh lost his head on the same scaffold on which your father perished." "True," replied the Marquise, without wincing in the slightest degree at the tragic remembrance thus called up. "But bear in mind, if you please, that our respective parents underwent persecution and proscription from diametrically opposite principles, in proof of which I may remark that while my family remained among the staunchest adherents of the exiled princes, your father lost no time in joining the new government, and that while the citizen Noirtier was a Girondin, the Count Noirtier became a senator." "Dear mother," interposed Renée, "you know very well it was agreed that all these disagreeable reminiscences should forever be laid aside." "Suffer me also, madame," replied Villefort, "to add my earnest request to Mademoiselle de Saint Méran's, that you will kindly allow the veil of oblivion to cover and conceal the past. What avails recrimination over matters wholly past recall? For my own part, I have laid aside even the name of my father, and altogether disown his political principles. He was, nay probably may still be, a Bonapartist, and is called Noirtier. I, on the contrary, am a staunch royalist, and style myself de Villefort. Let what may remain of revolutionary sap exhaust itself and die away with the old trunk, and condescend only to regard the young shoot which has started up at a distance from the parent tree, without having the power, any more than the wish, to separate entirely from the stock from which it sprung." "Bravo, Villefort!" cried the Marquis. "Excellently well said. Come now, I have hopes of obtaining what I have been for years endeavoring to persuade the Marquise to promise, namely, a perfect amnesty and forgetfulness of the past." "With all my heart," replied the Marquise. "Let the past be forever forgotten. I promise you it affords me as little pleasure to revive it as it does you. All I ask is that Villefort will be firm and inflexible for the future in his political principles. Remember also, Villefort, that we have pledged ourselves to his Majesty for your fealty and strict loyalty, and that at our recommendation the king consented to forget the past, as I do. and here she extended to him her hand, "as I now do at your entreaty. But bear in mind that should there fall in your way anyone guilty of conspiring against the government, you will be so much more bound to visit the offense with rigorous punishment, as it is known you belong to a suspected family." "Alas, madame," returned Villefort, "my profession, as well as the times in which we live, compels me to be severe. I have already successfully conducted several public prosecutions, and brought the offenders to merited punishment. But we have not done with the thing yet." "Do you indeed think so?" inquired the marquise. "I am at least fearful of it. Napoleon, in the island of Elba, is too near France, and his proximity keeps up the hopes of his partisans. Marseille is filled with half-pay officers, who are daily, under one frivolous pretext or other, getting up quarrels with the royalists. From hence arise continual and fatal duels among the higher classes of persons, and assassinations in the lower." "You have heard, perhaps," said the Comte de Salvieux, one of Monsieur de Saint-Méran's oldest friends, and chamberlain to the Comte d'Artois, "that the Holy Alliance propose removing him from thence." "Yes, they were talking about it when we left Paris," said Monsieur de Saint-Méran. "And where is it decided to transfer him?" "To St. Helena." "For heaven's sake, where is that?" asked the marquise. "An island situated on the other side of the equator, at least 2,000 leagues from here," replied the count. "So much the better, as Villefort observes. It is a great act of folly to have left such a man between Corsica, where he was born, and Naples, of which his brother-in-law is king, and face to face with Italy, the sovereignty of which he coveted for his son." "Unfortunately," said Villefort, "there are the treaties of 1814, and we cannot molest Napoleon without breaking those compacts." "Oh, well, we shall find some way out of it," responded Monsieur de Salvieux. "There wasn't any trouble over treaties when it was a question of shooting the poor Duc d'Anglès."
"Well," said the marquise, "it seems probable that, by the aid of the Holy Alliance, we shall be rid of Napoleon, and we must trust to the vigilance of Monsieur de Villefort to purify Marseille of his partisans. The king is either a king or no king. If he be acknowledged as sovereign of France, he should be upheld in peace and tranquillity, and this can best be effected by employing the most inflexible agents to put down every attempt at conspiracy. 'Tis the best and surest means of preventing mischief."
"Unfortunately, madame," answered Villefort, "the strong arm of the law is not called upon to interfere until the evil has taken place."
"Then all he has got to do is to endeavor to repair it."
"Nay, madame, the law is frequently powerless to effect this. All it can do is to avenge the wrong done."
"Oh, Monsieur de Villefort,"
cried a beautiful young creature, daughter to the Comte de Salvieux, and the cherished friend of Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran,
"do try and get up some famous trial while we are at Marseille. I never was in a law court, and I am told it is so very amusing."
"Amusing, certainly," replied the young man, "inasmuch as, instead of shedding tears as at the fictitious tale of woe produced at a theatre, you behold in a law court a case of real and genuine distress, a drama of life. The prisoner whom you there see pale, agitated, and alarmed, instead of, as is the case when a curtain falls on a tragedy, going home to sup peacefully with his family and then retiring to rest that he may recommence his mimic woes on the morrow, is removed from your sight merely to be reconducted to his prison and delivered up to the executioner. I leave you to judge how far your nerves are calculated to bear you through such a scene. Of this, however, be assured, that should any favorable opportunity present itself, I will not fail to offer you the choice of being present."
"For shame, Monsieur de Villefort," cried Renée, becoming quite pale. "Don't you see how you are frightening us, and yet you laugh?"
"What would you have? 'Tis like a duel. I have already recorded sentence of death 5 or 6 times against the movers of political conspiracies, and who can say how many daggers may be ready sharpened and only waiting a favorable opportunity to be buried in my heart?"
"Gracious heavens, Monsieur de Villefort,"
said Renée, becoming more and more terrified,
"you surely are not in earnest."
"Indeed I am," replied the young magistrate with a smile. And in the interesting trial that young lady is anxious to witness, the case would only be still more aggravated. Suppose, for instance, the prisoner, as is more than probable, to have served under Napoleon. Well, can you expect for an instant that one accustomed at the word of his commander to rush fearlessly on the very bayonet of his foe will scruple more to drive a stiletto into the heart of one he knows to be his personal enemy than to slaughter his fellow creatures, merely because bidden to do so by one he is bound to obey? Besides, one requires the excitement of being hateful in the eyes of the accused, in order to lash one's self into a state of sufficient vehemence and power. I would not choose to see the man against whom I pleaded smile as though in mockery of my words. No, my pride is to see the accused pale, agitated, and as though beaten out of all composure by the fire of my eloquence. Renée uttered a smothered exclamation. "Bravo!" cried one of the guests. "That is what I call talking to some purpose." "Just the person we require at a time like the present," said a second. "What a splendid business that last case of yours was, my dear Villefort," remarked a third. "I mean the trial of the man for murdering his father. Upon my word, you killed him ere the executioner had laid his hand upon him."
"Oh, as for parricides and such dreadful people as that," interposed Renée, "it matters very little what is done to them. But as regards poor unfortunate creatures whose only crime consists of having mixed themselves up in political intrigues—"
"Why, that is the very worst offense they could possibly commit. For don't you see, Renée, the king is the father of his people, and he who shall plot or contrive aught against the life and safety of the parent of 32 millions of souls is a parricide upon a fearfully great scale."
"I don't know anything about that," replied Renée. "But, Monsieur de Villefort, you have promised me, have you not, always to show mercy to those I plead for?"
"Make yourself quite easy on that point," answered Villefort with one of his sweetest smiles. "You and I will always consult upon our verdicts."
"My love," said the marquise, "attend to your doves, your lapdogs, and embroidery, but do not meddle with what you do not understand. Nowadays the military profession is in abeyance, and the magisterial robe is the badge of honor. There is a wise Latin proverb that is very much in point."
"Sedant arma togae," said Villefort with a bow.
"I cannot speak Latin," replied the marquise. "Well," said Renée, "I cannot help regretting you had not chosen some other profession than your own, a physician, for instance. Do you know, I always felt a shudder at the idea of even a destroying angel."
"Dear good Renée," whispered Villefort, as he gazed with unutterable tenderness on the lovely speaker. "Let us hope, my child," cried the marquis, "that Monsieur de Villefort may prove the moral and political physician of this province. If so, he will have achieved a noble work."
"And one which will go far to efface the recollection of his father's conduct,"
added the incorrigible marquise.
"Madame," replied Villefort with a mournful smile, "I have already had the honor to observe that my father has, at least I hope so, abjured his past errors, and that he is, at the present moment, a firm and zealous friend to religion and order, a better royalist possibly than his son, for he has to atone for past dereliction, while I have no other impulse than warm, decided preference and conviction." Having made this well-turned speech, Villefort looked carefully around to mark the effect of his oratory, much as he would have done had he been addressing the bench in open court.
"Do you know, my dear Villefort," cried the Comte de Salvieux, "that is exactly what I myself said the other day at the Tuileries, when questioned by His Majesty's principal chamberlain touching the singularity of an alliance between the son of a Girondin and the daughter of an officer of the Duc de Condé, and I assure you he seemed fully to comprehend that this mode of reconciling political differences was based upon sound and excellent principles. Then the king, who, without our suspecting it, had overheard our conversation, interrupted us by saying, 'Villefort.' Observe that the king did not pronounce the word Noirtier, but on the contrary placed considerable emphasis on that of Villefort. 'Villefort,' said his Majesty, 'is a young man of great judgment and discretion, who will be sure to make a figure in his profession. I like him much, and it gave me great pleasure to hear that he was about to become the son-in-law of the Marquis and Marquise de Saint-Méran. I should myself have recommended the match, had not the noble Marquis anticipated my wishes by requesting my consent to it. Is it possible that the king could have condescended so far as to express himself so favourably of me? Asked the enraptured Villefort. I give you his very words, and if the Marquis chooses to be candid, he will confess that they perfectly agree with what his Majesty said to him, when he went 6 months ago to consult him upon the subject of your espousing his daughter. That is true, answered the Marquis. How much do I owe this gracious prince? What is there I would not do to evince my earnest gratitude? That is right, cried the Marquise. I love to see you thus. Now, then, were a conspirator to fall into your hands, he would be most welcome. For my part, dear mother, interposed Renée, I trust your wishes will not prosper, and that Providence will only permit petty offenders, poor debtors, and miserable cheats to fall into Monsieur de Villefort's hands. Then I shall be contented. Just the same as though you prayed that a physician might only be called upon to prescribe for headaches, measles, and the stings of wasps, or any other slight affection of the epidermis. If you wish to see me the king's attorney, you must desire for me some of those violent and dangerous diseases from the cure of which so much honor redounds to the physician. At this moment, and as though the utterance of Villefort's wish had sufficed to effect its accomplishment, a servant entered the room, and whispered a few words in his ear. Villefort immediately rose from the table and quitted the room upon the plea of urgent business. He soon, however, returned, his whole face beaming with delight. Renée regarded him with fond affection, and certainly his handsome features, lit up as they then were with more than usual fire and animation, seemed formed to excite the innocent admiration with which she gazed on her graceful and intelligent lover. "You were wishing just now," said Villefort, addressing her, "that I were a doctor instead of a lawyer. Well, I at least resemble the disciples of Aesculapius in one thing, that of not being able to call a day my own, not even that of my betrothal." "And wherefore were you called away just now?" asked Mademoiselle de Saint Méran with an air of deep interest. "For a very serious matter, which bids fair to make work for the executioner." "How dreadful!" exclaimed Renée, turning pale. "Is it possible?" burst simultaneously from all who were near enough to the magistrate to hear his words. "Why, if my information prove correct, a sort of Bonaparte conspiracy has just been discovered." "Can I believe my ears?" cried the Marquise. "I will read you the letter containing the accusation at least," said Villefort. "The king's attorney is informed by a friend to the throne and the religious institutions of his country, that one named Edmond Dantès, mate of the ship Pharaon, this day arrived from Smyrna, after having touched at Naples and Porto Ferrajo, has been the bearer of a letter from Murat to the usurper, and again taken charge of another letter from the usurper to the Bonapartist Club in Paris. Ample corroboration of this statement may be obtained by arresting the above-mentioned Edmond Dantès, who either carries the letter for Paris about with him, or has it at his father's abode. Should it not be found in the possession of father or son, then it will assuredly be discovered in the cabin belonging to the said Dantès on board the Pharaon." "But," said Renée, "this letter, which after all is but an anonymous scrawl, is not even addressed to you, but to the king's attorney." "True, but that gentleman being absent, his secretary, by his orders, opened his letters, thinking this one of importance, he sent for me, but not finding me, took upon himself to give the necessary orders for arresting the accused party." "Then the guilty person is absolutely in custody?" said the Marquise. "Nay, dear mother, say the accused person. You know we cannot yet pronounce him guilty." "He is in safe custody," answered Villefort, "and rely upon it, if the letter is found, he will not be likely to be trusted abroad again, unless he goes forth under the especial protection of the headsman." "And where is the unfortunate being?" asked Renée. "He is at my house." "Come, come, my friend," interrupted the Marquise. "Do not neglect your duty to linger with us. You are the king's servant, and must go wherever that service calls you." "Oh, Villefort," cried Renée, clasping her hands and looking towards her lover with piteous earnestness, "be merciful on this day of our betrothal." The young man passed round to the side of the table where the fair pleader sat, and leaning over her chair, said tenderly, "To give you pleasure, my sweet Renee, I promise to show all the lenity in my power. But if the charges brought against this Bonapartist hero prove correct, why, then, you really must give me leave to order his head to be cut off." Renee shuddered. "Never mind that foolish girl, Villefort," said the Marquise. "She will soon get over these things." So saying, Madame de Saint Méran extended her dry bony hand to Villefort, who, while imprinting a son-in-law's respectful salute on it, looked at Renee as much as to say, "I must try and fancy 'tis your dear hand I kiss, as it should have been." "These are mournful auspices to accompany a betrothal," sighed poor Renee. "Upon my word, child," exclaimed the angry Marquise, "your folly exceeds all bounds. I should be glad to know what connection there can possibly be between your sickly sentimentality and the affairs of the state." "Oh, mother," murmured Renee. "Nay, madame, I pray you pardon this little traitor. I promise you that to make up for her want of loyalty, I will be most inflexibly severe." Then casting an expressive glance at his betrothed, which seemed to say, "Fear not, for your dear sake my justice shall be tempered with mercy," and receiving a sweet and approving smile in return, Villefort quitted the room. End of chapter 6.